Welcome to Where is Truth? We're so glad that you have joined us. My name is Norman Peckham, and I have with me Dr. Ariel Roth. He's a scientist, a lecturer, a teacher, a counselor to states. We're so glad that we can have you with us to discuss this, a deep question. It's a question that goes to our very roots, those especially to Christians who believe the Bible, and to those who are in the scientific field who believe what science teaches us. We are looking for the idea of where is truth. Now, science, Bible, where did all this discussion start?
You know, there are two main ideas regarding how we came about. And the two ideas could hardly be any different. Science tells us that life arose all by itself billions of years ago and advanced, and here we are finally as a product of evolution. The Bible tells us God created in 6 days just a few thousand years ago, and He is the one who produced all these complexities that we have, and that explains a lot of the nature we have. And a lot of people wonder which of these two ideas is correct, because the Bible is highly respected, most popular book
Ever written.
ever written. One study suggests 17 times as many publications of the Bible are going on than any secular book.
My.
On the other hand, science, highly respected also.
Well, look what it's given us: moon travel, transistors, televisions. Our life can't be any was changed by science.
And so many people are wondering which is true, the science or the Bible, these two models. This conflict has been going on here for quite a while, in fact, over 2 millennia. But it got much more interesting in the last 2 centuries.
Just in the last 200 years.
Yeah, the battle, and it's probably, you know, one of the greatest intellectual battles that there's ever been.
Yes.
If you go to Paris, to the Jardin des Plantes, you'll see a statue of Chevalier de Lamarck. And what will surprise a lot of people is when they read at the bottom of the statue, the founder of the theory of evolution. Now, most people think Darwin founded the theory of evolution. Evolution has been here for a long, long time. But Chevalier de Lamarck probably produced the first fairly coherent suggestion of how evolution would take place. And he suggested that usage would produce advancement. And for instance, if a deer was out there trying to get leaves off a tree and stretching its neck out, this would be passed on to the deer's offspring. They would have longer necks, and eventually you'd have a giraffe. The idea gained a little bit of appreciation, not very much. It gained a lot of criticism. And one of the persons who criticized it was a German by the name of August Weismann. And there was a story going around in Europe at that time that a cat had lost its tail, and the offspring of the cat had no tail. And they wanted to prove this is true. And so August Weismann started experimenting with mice, and what did he started cutting the tails off mice. And eventually cut the tails off 1,500 mice, kept breeding them, had 20 generations, 901 offspring.
How many lost their tails?
Not a one of them, not a one of them. So Lamarck's idea didn't carry very much support.
Not for very long, anyway.
Yeah. Interestingly, about half a century later, 1844, a book came out called Vestiges of the natural history of creation. And this was a book that suggested evolution. It didn't give a mechanism. And it was much more popular than Darwin's Origin of Species, which came up about 15 years later. Many more people bought this book and so on. And evolution was in people's thinking at that time. Then in 1859, Charles Darwin came out with his famous book, and titled here on the screen here, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And this kind of tells you his idea. He's suggesting this struggle, there's variation, and the best ones will survive. We have survival of the fittest, and he called this natural selection. And this kind of established the idea of evolution, because he had a mechanism there that seemed reasonable. It's variation, it's survival of the best ones and so on, and that seemed to suggest you could have advancement. There are many problems with that, as we'll probably be discussing later on. But Darwin idea were not accepted right at first, strange as it may seem, especially among biologists. But a couple of decades later, both scientists and theologians started accepting Darwin's view. And then, of course, some people started thinking, well, maybe we can compromise these two views here somewhere between the Bible. And a group, especially a notable group at Princeton University, suggested, well, God created over millions of years. He, in slow process, this did away with the idea of God created in 6 days, of course. And this idea has gained a fair amount of popularity.
So this keeps God in the picture and yet leaves millions of years in the picture also.
On. Some people are comfortable with both of those, but it doesn't fit the biblical model. Early in the last century, around 1900 to 1925 and 30 and so on, Seventh-day Adventist by the name of George McCready Price became the leader in the movement that suggested the Bible is true, science and its evolutionary model is wrong. And he proposed a recent creation. He proposed a worldwide flood. And this is extremely important in this model. It's an integral part of the history of origins in the Bible. We had creation, and then because of man's sin, God purified the earth with this worldwide flood. Mm-hmm. George McCready Price's ideas were accepted within limits. He certainly was the leader at that time. And for about a quarter of a century after that, there wasn't too much activity. But one of the key events that occurred just at the time that Price was more or less in his prime is the Scopes trial. Took place in Dayton, Tennessee.
It was awful called the monkey trial, wasn't it?
Yes, and they had chimpanzees there to add a little atmosphere to the thing. And over 1,000 people tried to attend the trial, and you have a picture here of the courthouse in the little town of Dayton, Tennessee. And technically, this trial was over whether or not a biology teacher by the name of John Scopes had been teaching evolution. And the trial decided, yes, he was guilty, and he was acquitted on the basis of technicality later on. But the real issue was not that at all. This trial attracted reporters from all over the world.
Because?
The issue was, were traditionalists who believed the Bible true, or were modernists who followed the scientific model of evolution true?
So people were making up their mind on the basis of this trial.
This is the big issue, and it's a very big issue in our minds. Mm-hmm. We wonder where we came from, why are we here, what's our ultimate destiny? It's a very basic philosophical question, and people were very much wondering about this thing. Well, the story, the popular story that prevailed in the last century is that creation, the Bible and so on, lost at this trial and evolution won out. But the recent investigations by scholars have shown this is not the picture at all. Many thought that the chief lawyer for the scientific side, the evolution side, Clarence Darrow, who you can see here in this picture speaking to the group, had lost out. Because of some unpleasant behavior also and so on. And Williams Jennings Bryan, who was 3 times candidate for the presidency of the United States, was defending the creation side. He passed away soon after that, but some try to say, well, no, he lost, so on. From newspaper reports, so on, it seemed like he won more so.
The popular opinion at the time?
Popular opinion than Darrow, per se. Well, the issue regained some interest in the middle of the century when a book came out titled The Genesis Flood, written by Whitcomb and Henry Morris. And this book advocated the flood. The flood is the answer. It's not evolution over a billion years. It's recent creation and the flood. And that book spread all over the world. See, parents were getting very concerned because in schools, they were sending their children to public schools. And children would come back home and tell the parents, well, my science teacher told me the Bible is wrong. I hear these parents trying to nurture their children with morality, the truthfulness of the Bible, and Christian principles, and so on. And here the teachers were telling them, hey, this is not correct. So you can see why there's such a great deal of interest in this particular issue. The Supreme Court has several times ruled that you cannot teach creation in public schools because this would be introducing religion in the public schools. And because of this, some have suggested, well, why don't we just teach the scientific part of creationism and call it scientific creationism? So this came on number. And then later on, the idea of intelligent design was proposed. And this is the dominant issue of the conflict right at present. And intelligent design doesn't suggest.
But this is a whole worldwide issue. Have there been any studies to see what most of the people believe as opposed to just scientists?
Well, this is the surprising thing here in this whole issue, and is that people are not believing the science model as much as the scientists wish at all, to put it mildly. The Gallup poll organization has surveyed the adult public population in the United States at least 6 times, and generally get all the same results. We have the results of one of these polls here, and they don't vary, just a few percentage over the years. And if you look at this, you may be surprised. They give these individuals over 1,000, they usually check over 1,000 people, they gave them 4 choices. And you can see the choices here on the screen. First one is that humans developed over millions of years. No God was involved. This is the scientific model, so-called evolutionary scientific evolutionary model. Only 12% of the adults in the United States believe that model, which is very shocking to the scientific community that thinks they're the closest thing to truth that there is. Then they give them another choice. Humans developed over millions of years, God guided in the process.
That was that scientific evolution that you were talking about earlier, to where you put the two together.
Two together.
Yeah.
37% believe that. And then they were in the chart. God created humans in the present form within the last 10,000 years. And that, 45% believed that. And then 6% had no opinion, per se. So,
well, most of the people believe in God as a creator.
Yes.
Is the whole scientific community against that, or are they divided too?
The scientific community, of course, one was very surprised at these results right here, because, you know, hardly anybody was listening to them. Other people were surprised because, you know, number one, which is only 12%, is what is taught in the schools to all these students.
Yeah.
And they have to, you know, report it as they're taught and so on. It's indoctrination to at this point that very few of the general public actually believe this model, so on. But coming to the question of the scientific community, again, a surprise, another surprise in a survey. And this is a real paradox in a ways. Because we usually think of scientists as, you know, a bunch of atheists out there that are, you know, really just pounding evolution into people's brains and so on. This study was done by taking 1,000 names out of the listing of American men and women of science and giving them three choices. One, do you believe in God? Two, you don't believe in God. And three, you don't know. Now, what do you mean by God? Well, the definition of God can vary, you know, from just a force in nature, or one of my professors told me, God is nature, that's God.
What was it in this study?
Well, this study, the definition was given, and you can read it at the bottom of the presentation there. And to say that, as far as for scientists to say that he believed in God, he had to say, I believe in a God in intellectual and effective communication with humankind. This is not just a principle out there, you understand?
Oh.
Furthermore, a God to whom one may pray in expectation of receiving an answer. Furthermore, by answer I mean more than the subjective psychological effect of prayer.
So this says that 40% of the scientists out there believe in an answer, or prayer answering God.
This is what was surprising, you know, because it completely changed the picture we have of scientists.
I should say.
40% believe in a God that answers their prayers. 45% don't. And 15% do not know.
Maybe we just ought to just accept the fact that, and maybe reframe the whole thing in a better question. A question of, where would I find truth, as opposed to, is science right or is the Bible right?
Yeah, well, let's face it here. The present attitude of the scientific community, which is, we will not publish about God in our journals or in our textbooks or teach about him, does not reflect the beliefs of the scientific community as a whole. Almost half of those scientists, at least 4 out of 10 for sure, believe in a God that answers their prayer. What is being taught, what is being presented,
Is not what they believe.
is not what they, at least
40% of them.
at least a significant part of them,
Right.
believe per se, and it doesn't represent the thinking of the scientific community as a whole there. So that raises this question you raised right there. And how do we adjust for that? And instead of excluding God, I think what you suggested is a better way to go.
Maybe like, where can I find truth? A search for truth as opposed to a, can I defend science or defend the Bible?
Very much so. Very much so. We want the whole story. What truth do we find when we look at as much information as possible? Let's not exclude one model or the other.
Look at them both.
Look at both situations. There's good science, there's bad science. There's good biblical interpretation, there's bad biblical interpretation. In the basic search for truth, there's not such a strong difference between science and the Bible.
What do you mean?
I mean that if I read in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, the Bible says, prove all things, hold fast that which is good.
Use your head?
Absolutely.
Check it out?
Test it out, check it out.
Okay. But that's what science would say, is it not?
Basically, science is searching for truth. Basically, if you look at the Bible, we're looking for truth, and the Bible tells us to test all things. We're much more likely to find truth if we do that, and much more likely to find truth if we're willing to look at as much information as possible. Now, both science and the Bible require some faith.
Meaning we weren't there, so we can't prove it.
Right. But there's a lot of scientific data that is hard to explain unless you believe the biblical model of creation. As an illustration, I just mentioned, how did life originate by itself? You know, the most baffling question as far as evolution is concerned. Yet the Bible has an explanation for this that it's possible for us to at least think is reasonable. It takes a certain amount, there's a little amount of blind faith in either model and so on, but I think it takes probably more blind faith to believe that things just happen here by accident than to believe that there's a designer, creator in this whole issue. This diagram here illustrates what we're talking about a little bit and trying to put these two together. One circle is the Bible, the other circle is science. And we want to put both of them together. That's where things get interesting. That's where things are in the middle, and you can see that. That's
the most complex, the most complete.
And we're more likely to find all truth if we have more information. We accept both models that are involved there, and so on. There's an interesting idea out there that suggests that this is not a bad way to go, and this is not an idea from preachers, so on. This is an idea proposed by some intellectual leaders. I'm speaking of Alfred North Whitehead, for instance, at Harvard, and Collingwood at Oxford, Hokius at the University of Utrecht, Jacques at Seton Hall, and so on. The idea they have is that the reason science developed in the Western world is because that Western world had the Bible. Now, this is, of course, another shock.
Why would the Bible help them with that?
It's because of the God of the Bible. The thesis is that science did not develop in Hindu cultures, Chinese cultures, Babylonian cultures, very stable cultures had plenty of time to develop science because their gods were not consistent. They had sometimes many gods, no gods, capricious gods, unpredictable gods, while the God of the Bible is more precise, more predictable, and thus permitted the cause and effect system of science to become established in the Western world.
So an orderly universe allowed, a belief in an orderly universe allows us to test it, to measure it, and that's what science does.
Now, the paradox here is that the God that may be responsible for science is rejected by science at present.
Yeah.
Which tells a little bit about the capriciousness of people. And strange as it may seem to you, the pioneers of modern science mostly all believed in God. Science, modern science, which developed 4 or 5 centuries ago, did not develop in a secular, atheistic environment at all. The pioneers of modern science, the leaders of modern science, all believed in God, and they were studying the laws that God had created. And you know many of these leaders. Here's a picture of Isaac Newton, considered by some to be the greatest scientist of all time. He very much believed in God. He wrote more about God and religious things than he wrote about science, per se. You've heard of Robert Boyle.
Yes.
You've heard Boyle's Law, Kepler, Galileo, Pascal, a Frenchman, dealt with statistics. So Linné dealt with biological factors. These people, mostly all, believed in God. And science was established in that environment.
So the science that rejects God is a relatively new phenomenon.
Right. It's happened mainly in the last century and a half.
Some of the points that we have identified is that the Bible would say, go ahead and test, prove it out. We find out that the science that rejects God is a relatively new phenomenon, and that we are going to have opportunity to check out a whole lot of these various areas as we go on with this series and try to bring good common sense and good scientific principles to the issues that the Bible talks about and the issues that science talks about, and try to pull together a truth that is intellectually satisfying to both our scientific side and our religious side. Come back when we continue this discussion as to where is truth. If you would like additional free information about these discussions, there is a PowerPoint resource available on the internet that covers many more details than could be provided in this lecture series. The resource is titled The Bible and Science and is available at scienceandscriptures.com. Be sure to add an S at the end of the word Scriptures to get to the right web page. The Bible and Science resource follows the same sequence of topics as the Where is Truth series, but it is divided into 17 separate discussions instead of the 14 videos of the Where is Truth series. The title of the discussions, an introductory outline, and an index will lead you to the topics you want. The Bible and Science discussions served as the resource for the Where is Truth videos. To facilitate understanding and learning, each of the 17 PowerPoint discussions in the Bible and Science resource is provided with a set of questions and their answers. You will find these at the end of each PowerPoint presentation. The Bible and Science resource was designed especially for students and teachers. However, it can be of great help to anybody interested in the topics.